Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today, Lord. And Lord, just thank you for the reason for this season, Lord. And Lord, just be with the speaker today, Lord, and just open our hearts and let us hear what you would have us to hear, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen. Kids, you can go to Kids Zone.
My favorite duty all Sunday morning, right there. Normally, of course, at this time, you'd be watching a video while I'm having my fun over there. But today, we get to welcome some special guests. I guess it was about a year ago or so that Marcia, our financial secretary, who's blessed us with her presence today, I think it has something to do with her daughter and son-in-law, but anyway, we're glad she's here. I think she began to tell me about this furlough that was coming up and how excited she was and all of that, and I just kind of heard that, but it didn't really register with me until a couple of months ago. She said, hey, they're in town and they're staying at Union, and they would love to come and speak and share. And I thought, man, that'd be a great idea as part of our Lottie Moon Christmas offering kickoff that we did a couple of weeks ago. We posted the posters, and I got to thinking, I said, the last time I asked one of these missionaries to come and speak, and then I left town with the adults to go on a camping retreat, and he didn't show. So, what's that, once bit, twice careful? And so when I contacted Chris and said, hey, we'd love to have you come and everything, I knew we weren't going to get bit twice. I knew we were looking forward to it, and I was telling him that story this morning. Come to find out, Ron Roy, who's my friend here, his son is Chris's and Melanie's supervisor back in Brazil. So kind of a small world. Kay was on the pulpit committee that called Wayne, Melanie's father and Marcia's husband, to Briarcrest. Was it Briarcrest at that time, or did it have another name? It was East Park at that time. She was there, and Mick knows them, having served there in their church with their dad it was Briarcrest by then, right? Briarcrest. So we have a few folks out here that know or at least heard of, and Kay has been telling me all along how much she's looking forward to hearing Chris and Melanie's presentation and what they're going to do for us today. And so we're indeed honored and grateful to have you serving with the IMB and on furlough here and staying there in the missionary residence in Union. Thank you so much for the work you do. We're looking forward to whatever God has laid on your heart. So come on and do whatever God asks you to do. Let's welcome Chris and Melanie. Now, let me say, inside the worship guide, that's a 2012 picture. It's all I could do. They don't look like that now, but you don't look like you looked in 2012 either. And they might catch you up on some of the things that happened in the photograph there, because I think that was the announcement of the engagement of your daughter to whoever that fella is on the end. I like the fact you put him on the end, because if he wasn't the guy, you can always cut him out of the picture. There you go.
Thank you. We appreciate being here. Several things, and you said we've got until 2:30 to speak? Is that okay? That includes lunch. I'm just kidding. You hope I'm kidding. I appreciate the music this morning. I like a simplicity at Christmas, and I love churches, doing lasers and and that kind of stuff, but I really appreciated just the music and stuff this morning and leading, and I do that. The other thing, a frightening thing for a missionary, just to let you know, you never know what to wear, because when I became a believer at 17, back in 1980, we wore a coat and tie to church, and as time progressed, it's like when you come back on furlough, you don't know what the church is doing, and I don't see any ties in here this morning, so I'm like, Melody's asking, well, is it a casual church? Is it, because I don't think there's any churches anymore that really are very formal. And then sometimes churches ask you to wear traditional type of clothing. And so one time, a guy that was working with us had me speak at his church, this music minister, and I told him what I was going to wear, and he told the pastor, and I went to church that morning, and I was wearing flip-flops, blue jeans, and a T-shirt. And he just kind of looked at me and looked back over and said, "You tried to warn me." I mean, I guess it's okay for some things. But it's like, that's what we wear, what we wear in Brazil. So, anyway, I hope this is okay. We appreciate very much being able to speak to you this morning. We love sharing this time of year. Melody and I kind of play a game of ping pong. I share, she shares. We kind of go back and forth. We're going to share about our calling, our testimonies. A lot about Brazil and even Canada. And our testimonies are night and day different. I was not raised in a Christian home. In fact, you remember back in the 70s, early 80s, I think that most people, we lived in Fox Meadows, and probably most people on Elgin Drive went to church back in the day. Now you'd probably go back to Elgin Drive and no one goes to church. We were that family. We didn't go to church. If on the outside, many of you remember, Leave It to Beaver. I was the Beav. I had an older brother. Dad worked. Mom was worked at home. She didn't wear pearls, but she cleaned the house and she was the home mom, that kind of stuff. But on the inside, it was pretty tumultuous. My dad was an alcoholic. I had a grandmother that prayed for me all the time. Thank God I started going to Briarcrest, where I heard the gospel, especially on Wednesdays. And then there was a TV preacher, you're not going to believe, who led me to Jesus. I would watch on Sunday nights at 11:30 on Channel 24, Jim Bakker. Everyone goes, what? He actually led me to Christ one night. And it was an amazing, I can't wait. My dad's side of the family is Church of Christ, and they believe you go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Tuesday, everything. If you don't, then you lose your salvation. I'm looking forward to being up in heaven and getting behind my grandmother and going, boo, I'm here with you anyway. But anyway, we both share a testimony. Melody's got an opposite side of her testimony.
Well, if he's night, then I'm the day. We're night and day different. I started going to church 9 months before I was born. Every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, visitation. Every time the church door was open, because my dad was the pastor, I was there. From a very early age, became a believer, baptized when I was 7. And as a 13-year-old, I knew that God had something for me. I didn't know at that time it was missions, but my answer was yes. I'd heard my dad say that many times from the pulpit. Whatever God asks of you, before you even know what it is, you say yes. And that was my answer, yes. So right out of college, to make a really long story short, I graduated in December from Union, and in January went to missionary training in Richmond, Virginia, and left to become a journeyman missionary in Brazil. I served there 2 years, the most rewarding but hardest 2 years of my life, and I taught missionary children. That led, are we going to go into the long story of our call to missions? Or that led to, as my 2 years was ending as a journeyman, I felt that God was calling me back to missions. And I really felt it would be back in Brazil because I had a love for Brazil then. Came back and Chris and I began to date. That's a whole different story. He had already proposed to my mother and father without us dating and told them that he wanted to marry me. My dad, in very wise words, said, "Chris, I think maybe you should date first."
I knew.
We were married, and I had this call to missions that I kept in my heart and a love for Brazil. And Chris
Didn't.
kindly gave me 30 seconds a day to talk about missions or Brazil. I'm not kidding. Ready, set, go. Your time is up. That's all I want to hear. But God just kept working, kept moving, kept calling. Chris was led to go into ministry. Maybe you should take that part up.
So we got married and we moved to Atlanta to get on our own. And my degree is in broadcast journalism. I wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to tell stories. I'm so glad I'm not in that business now. But when we moved to Atlanta, I put my resume out at CNN and WXIA, the TV stations that had it, not one bite. Nothing was going on. And I found myself in the middle of the night pushing beer, cigarettes, and gasoline at Quick Trip. I'm thinking, what am I doing? I've got this degree from Memphis State, and I'm doing this in the middle of the night? And that's when God's going, I'm trying to get your attention, idiot. You know, he didn't say idiot, but he might as well have. And I felt God was calling us back to leading us back to Memphis. I got a job at a local radio station. Trying to sell airtime at a station, AM station, went off there at 10 p.m. was impossible. And then God kept saying, I want you to go to seminary. Now, I didn't want to go to seminary. I was like, no, I've had enough of that. I went to seminary. Went to Mid-America for a couple of years. I'm not just saying it because she's here, but I had the honor and the privilege to work under Melody's dad as his youth minister there at Briarwood when they moved out to Cordova. And then we were in a couple of other churches. And while we were in Greenville, South Carolina, and then Albertville, Alabama. Do any of y'all heard of, they say Arttville. It's just south of Huntsville, and so it's close enough to NASA. But then you had rocket scientists and chicken farmers in our church. It was a really fun. It was a great, and we're in touch with them all the time, even to this day. But God began getting on my heart about going on the mission field. I was like, oh God, I really love doing youth ministry. We own a house. We're doing well. And I would give her just take 30 seconds, just talk, whatever, get it off your mind. And I remember one night I was saying, well, God, you know, I'm too prideful to bring it up. I feel like we're being led to the mission field, but she's going to have to bring it up. And as best as I can remember, I was walking from the kitchen to the den that night, and Melody says something like, what if God called us to Brazil? And I just went, okay. It's one of those moments I said, well, I think that's what God is leading us to do. So we started that process. We'll get into some stories. So we had lived in several cities in Brazil. We did a year in language school outside of Sao Paulo. We lived 6 years in Aracaju, which is on the coast of northeast Brazil. Melody's dad said the weather was hotter and hottest, and he was right, it was always hot. We lived in Sao Paulo for 10 years, which is a massive, the city itself is 12 million, the area is 20. Then we moved down to South Brazil for several years, where, interestingly, that's where a lot of the German immigration came in, and you could actually hear German on the streets. It's very European in South Brazil. We moved to Ottawa, Canada for 4 years, came back to Brazil, and then now we're serving as missionaries in residence. I'm gonna pick up.
A verse that I claimed very early in our missionary journey is found in Habakkuk 1:5. And I like the way you say that in Portuguese so much better. Habakkuk 1:5. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. And I look back on our 30-something years in our missionary journey, and I'm amazed at what God has done. We got on that first plane when my oldest was 5 years old, Wes. Wes now lives in Wichita, Kansas. He just got married in October to Rachel, and he is a detective with the sheriff's department there. Our daughter, Rachel, you got that? We have 2 Rachels. Rachel was 3 when we went to Brazil. She now lives in Chicago with her Brazilian husband, Tiago, who came to know the Lord through our ministry. They have our grandson, Pedro, who is 3. And then our youngest, Michael, we adopted in Brazil. He now lives in Wichita, Kansas with his wife, Rebecca, who's Canadian. Did you pick up? We collect in-laws wherever we live. And they have our granddaughter, Abby, who is a year old, just turned a year old, and are expecting our next grandson in late April. I have a little bit of a different ministry than Chris. Chris is all students all the time. And in 2016, after our oldest 2 had graduated college, our youngest, we were in Ottawa and had just started school, public school for high school. They contacted me about becoming the TCK educational consultant for the Americas. And what that means is I work with families to keep them on the mission field. Because a big reason that a lot of our families come back to the U.S. is their children, and not being able to find educational resources, or not being able to find a school that fits, or having learning disabilities, and it's just overwhelming when you're on the mission field. So my job is to keep them on the field by becoming their educational consultant. All the MKs, missionary kids, they call me the principal because I oversee their homeschooling, help them find the curriculum. I find their schools, national schools, where they learn Spanish or Portuguese. I visit them in their international schools to make sure they're doing well. But I cover all the countries from Canada down to the tip of South America. And then about a year ago, I was asked to cover half of Africa. So I have a foot in 2 parts of the world. It's a really fun job, though, because I see kids that were struggling come to where they're able to read. And I see kids that hated being a MK come to enjoy it. And I see parents that were ready to throw in the towel and give up be able to stay. It's also a little bit heartbreaking because I've seen kids that their needs just can't be met on the mission field because it's difficult. And I have to send them back to the U.S. for a little while and find them support in the U.S. until they're able to come back to the field in a healthy way. It's another fun part of the job that I get to travel and visit these families. I've been on canoes in the Amazon River. I've been in a house where the front yard is in Colombia and the backyard is in Brazil. That's fun. I've been in Africa where I had to stop a meeting with a parent because the monkeys were interrupting. You know, it's just a fun job that I have, but it's really exciting and rewarding.
So we had 6 years there in Ottacazoo, and my whole ministry has always been young adults and students. Christmas has also been very different where we live. I remember one Christmas, we had satellite TV, and it was Christmas, and we were watching Al Roker from Rockefeller Center being, really cold, and there we were just like burning up. I remember one night, this was in July, and the season's basically the same in Northeast Brazil, but one night Melody, our windows are always open, and she said, it's kind of cold, she got a blanket. And she said, go outside and see what the temperature was. It was 80. Our blood had thinned, So then we moved to South Brazil, and it's hot at Christmas, and then it's cold during July. I remember one year we have a house church, and I could see my breath in our house. We didn't have heat, so that's just the way life is. I also remember Santa in Aracaju didn't arrive. Well, he came in on a sleigh, but it was more of a jet ski off the Atlantic Ocean. And you'd go to the mall, and there was Santa's helpers very scantily clad. It's just a very different reality of Christmas. And then you go down south, and it's very German and Italian as well, European and all. So we lived there in Aracaju for 6 years, and God led us to Sao Paulo. And I remember we were headed toward meetings in Paraguay, and we were in traffic. Now, if you've ever been, traffic doesn't stop. It does stop, but the city doesn't stop. It just goes 24 hours a day. And I remember in traffic telling Melody, don't ever think God's going to call us to this place. 3 weeks after the meeting, God was leading us to move to Sao Paulo. God's kind of funny that way. And I didn't know exactly how were we going to approach ministry. And we started what we call Zoe, Z-O-E, a house church based in our home. Zoe is Greek for life. I remember we had a group of young adults with a church plant that I hate to say failed, but it failed. And there's a group of us that didn't know what to do next. And so we started meeting in our house. And we were reading this book, Purpose Driven Church by Rick Warren, and it was like God was saying, hey, Chris, I wrote a book. It's called the Bible. And so we put Rick's book aside and got out the Bible. And we were meeting on Sunday nights. Now in Brazil, the big church is Sunday night. It's not Sunday morning. But the problem, especially with young adults and students, is they've got class the next day. They've got work the next day. And a lot of them don't want to go to church at 7:30 at night and get home by 9:30. So we moved it to Saturday night. Now, it was funny because we would have very few on Sunday night, and we moved it to Saturday night, and we were having between 20 and 40 every single week. It got to the point we started at 6:30, people would come early, and by 10 o'clock, Melody's like, we need to get them to leave because it's time for bed. It was that kind of, because community is everything in Brazil. You're never alone. And the thing is, we taught that church wasn't necessarily a noun, wasn't a place, but church is a verb. Church is someone who we are that goes out. So we did meet on Saturday night for worship. We had music, we had Bible study. We started off with what we called a mesa, the table, and everybody brought food to share. I remember one night, this young man, his name was Michael, not our Michael. In Brazil, they sell sleeves of cookies. It's like 10 to 12 just wrapped up. And he kind of placed it, he didn't want people to see, that's all he brought. Because some people would bring extra stuff. Some people would bring some really good food. And I said, what's wrong? He said, it's all I had. Now, a sleeve of cookies was maybe 50 cents US. He couldn't really afford that. Because you got to understand, he also had to pay for bus fare there and back. He didn't have the money. It was kind of like the widow's mite. It's like she gave all she had. And that's what Michael did that night. I said, Michael, you've given more than anybody else in this room, So we would share, and we would go to almost 10 o'clock. Now, the thing is, the last thing that we would ask in our house church was, where did you see God this week? And we would have non-Christians and Christians. And the testimonies that you would hear that night back and forth, just, I saw God. Because we would want you to see not just God on a Saturday night, not just God in specific, but God is work at the little things during the week, and He's also in the big stories as well. And we would share those stories, and then we'd send ourselves out during the week to see ourselves as the church. On Mondays, we did free hugs. Now you think, well, what is that about? There's the Avenida Paulista is the busiest street in all of Latin America. Over 1 million people walk that street every single day. It's kind of like the Times Square of New York, but on steroids. A group of us would meet at 6:30 on Monday nights. We would have these signs that say abraços, which means hugs in Portuguese, and we would just hug people. And people would say, why are you doing this? And that gave us a chance to share Jesus, gave us a chance to share the gospel. Then afterwards, we'd meet at Starbucks down the street and just share what was going on. On Saturdays, we worked in a favela, in a slum. And we worked children's ministry. And it was really cool because maybe some of those students that would never come to church on Saturday night to Zoe at our house would come work in the favela, and we would welcome them. Why? Because they're seeing the gospel at work. They're seeing us do that. And so we would have a ton of people with us on Saturdays. We gave out free sandwiches to homeless. I remember one night we taught tithing, we taught give, and so we had a bunch of money, and one night, Tiago, our future son, I'll get to that in a second, he said, what are we doing with that money? And I said, I'm not sure. And he said, well, Walmart used to exist there in Brazil, had these blankets on sale really cheap. So a group from Zoe went up to Walmart, bought a bunch of blankets, and went out to the city and handed them out to people living on the street. Those type stories. So I compare ministry sometimes, we're playing ping pong, but it's also dominoes. And there was a time we did this thing called Zoe Fest. English is the biggest in, if you will, on campus. It gives us legitimacy on campus. We're able to partner with the languages department because you have people that are fluent in English. And there's also English schools around town, and one was just up the street. And I said, hey, I got to know the director of the school, and we would help them with their classes. And I said, what if we did a big Saturday push, and we used your space, and I had some volunteer teams come in, and so we would have a group of students from the U.S. Come in. They would go hit campuses during the week, and they would invite those students to Zoe Fest that Saturday. Zoe Fest, we had a rock climbing wall, we had a DJ, we had free food. It was just a big party, and we had up to 400 students coming to that. We did it 2 years in a row. Well, one afternoon, there was this young man looking, it was basically a 2-story house, and he was looking out the window. We noticed, and he was like, what is this going on? And he started meeting up with somebody from Zoe, and he started coming on Saturday nights, and one night, Melody noticed, he opened the door, and you could just tell the countenance. He was just a different person, and he said that he had become a Christian. Several weeks later, we baptized, I think 6 or 8 in our backyard, and Tiago was one of those. My daughter was one of those as well, so we baptized in our backyard. Well, here's where it gets sticky. A few weeks later, Tiago comes to me and says he wants to date my daughter. And I'm like, well, he has to come ask my permission. That's it. That was just the thing. They don't do that so much in Brazil, much less here. But a lot of families, you want the guy that's going to date your daughter to be a little intimidated. Got that, Dad? And so he asked, and I said, but she's going to Liberty University. She's going to find a doctor or a lawyer and get rich, and we'll be able to live with them, and all this stuff. And it's like, okay. So they dated for a few months. I was fine, and she went off to Liberty. Well, lo and behold, we get a phone call after Christmas or something, I can't remember. And Rachel says she felt led by the Lord to come back and study Liberty online. We're like, you felt led by Tiago to come back and study online. Well, about a year after that, they were married in our house. And the one thing that I told Tiago from that very first meeting when he asked to date Rachel, I said, I just want you to treat her like a lady. And almost every time when I see him, he'll corner me. He'll say, Dad, I'm treating her like a lady. I go, no, you are. So Melody talked about Pedro, who's our first grandson. He's 3. He speaks 2 languages. He'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and he'll just he doesn't even know it's a second language. And then, do you want to talk about Rebecca, and you want me to keep going?
Rebecca.
Our daughter-in-law. Well, anyway, we have 3 kids, and so when we lived in Ottawa, We lived there for 4 years. Now, you talk about Christmas different. There was one day that Michael and I walked home from church. It was a literal blizzard. So we go from 100 degrees at Christmas to negative, and snow and stuff. But Michael started attending a youth group there in Ottawa, and he met Rebecca. And they became good friends. We came back on stateside before we moved back to Brazil. So we were in Brazil for 22 years, went to Ottawa for 4, and then came back to Brazil. Well, Michael graduated high school, and then he joined the U.S. Army, and he was in infantry for nearly about 4 years. During that time, he and Rebecca got married. There, he was stationed in Hawaii. I felt led to go visit, so we did. And it was also nice when your daughter worked for an airline and you could get tickets really cheap. They married. We have a Brazilian American, a Brazilian American grandson, a Brazilian Canadian, and Michael is American. Michael's another story. He's our adopted son, but Brazilian, Canadian, Hawaiian granddaughter, and like I said, it's dominoes. And I keep wondering, I keep going back, and I'm not building ourselves up, but when you give to Lottie Moon, this is the one time of year, one offering on nearly 4,000 missionaries. And I'm not saying this stuff, well, a lot of this stuff couldn't happen if we didn't go, but I look at it and go, if we didn't go, how much our family dynamic would have been different. How many lives, because we had teams, because we had individuals that came down. There's a program called Hands On. It's a semester program, and it's when you come for a week, you kind of fall in love. You go, oh, I could do this all the time. And then if you come down for a semester, you live with we had 2 live with Canadian families, but then we had 31 at different semesters, different groups live with Brazilian families. So you get immersed into the culture. And I tell our hands-on students that come and work with us for a semester, they'll say, well, what's your ultimate goal? And I'll say, for you to cry. And they'll say for me to cry, and go, because you're going to be so immersed that you don't want to leave. Well, one afternoon, I had a group, and we did free hugs there on campus at Unicinos University. And Americans, we do the little side hug. We do that, kind of like the there kind of thing. Well, Brazilians go in for the hug. I mean, it's a hug. So I had the group of Americans there on campus, and they're like, free hugs, here we are. And I said, so this young man, Bruno, came up, and I said, hey, Stuart, go hug Bruno. And Stuart's like, can I just say hi? I'm like, no, go hug him, and he goes up and they hug, and they eventually, they swap phone numbers and stuff, and they start meeting up. Stuart's group, that group of volunteers leaves. Bruno and I start meeting up weekly. He's not a believer. Another group comes in, and Gabby become friends. They weren't dating, they assure me, but I get this, Gabby's group leaves, and I get this phone call several weeks later. She calls me supervisor. She said, I need to tell you something. We weren't dating at the time, but we're now dating. And I said, Gabby, he's in Brazil and you're in Denver. And that's technology. And it wasn't that long later, Bruno came to Christ, and I was asked to do their wedding there in Colorado. And they have a daughter, and her name is Zoe. So we could tell story after story after story about things like that.
Ping pong.
I can keep talking.
Ping pong, remember? Goes back and forth. Our time is running a little bit short, so I get to do my favorite thing, and that is to say thank you. Because of you, we are able to be on the field without worrying about fundraising, because you give to Lottie Moon. We had a whole year of language study with That being our total focus, learning Portuguese, because she gave to Lottie Moon. Because she gave to Lottie Moon, we never worried about where we wanted to live or who was going to pay for the house. It was a Lottie house. We never had to worry about a car. We drove a Lottie car, your car, because she gave to Lottie Moon. We never had to worry about health care. We never had to worry about any of those things that so many of our friends that work for other organizations have to write their letters and do their fundraising. We get to come and ask you to give to Lottie Moon and just say thank you. Thank you for making it possible for us to be on the field. Thank you for making it possible to collect in-laws as we go live in different places and serve there. Thank you for making such a big difference in our family. But thank you, even more than that, thank you for praying for the missionary. You may not have known Chris and Melody Julian to pray specifically for them or what our needs were, but God did. God knew back in the early days when we found out my dad was in poor health, and when we found out that Chris's father passed away suddenly, when our house flooded. You didn't know you were praying for Chris and Melody that were really having a hard time, but God did. When you prayed for the missionary, that came for us as well. You didn't know we had a son taken away when we were trying to adopt him. You didn't know Chris's mother passed away. My dad passed away. You didn't know all those things, but God did. So when you prayed for the missionary, God met our needs. And every step along the way in 32 years, God has been so faithful because you prayed. And I just want to say thank you.
Just to wrap up, if you had seen me 29 years ago in Brazil, you would have thought I'd never make it. I was struggling with the culture, I was struggling with the language, I was struggling with everything. The one thing they teach us a lot with the IMB, but the one thing I kept going back to is what they taught us to go back to, and that's our calling. Now, I believe that some of us have a specific missionary calling. Some of us have specific pastoral calling. But we're all called to share, every single one of us. We're just your brother and sister, just with a specific calling. But we love and appreciate so much that you do sacrificially give. There are, I think, 1,500 in the pipeline, they're saying, of missionaries wanting to go. And that's possible, so you can give in hundreds of countries and dozens of cities all over the world. And because you pray, because you sinned, here I am 29 years later saying, and I never thought, if there was a person in that group you would have said would never make it, would have been me. I'm bragging, but we're the only couple from that group that's still standing. The rest of them have retired or have gone on to other things. But thank you, and thank you very much for letting us share this morning.
While I'm about to do this, thank you for your words, thank you for your things. Give kind of an introductory 101 to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering that people haven't heard or don't know exactly what that looks like. How do you see it from your perspective?
From my perspective, to begin at the very beginning, Lottie Moon was one of the first single missionaries in China and gave her life. And that's why it's called Lottie Moon Christmas Offering. But Lottie Moon Christmas Offering, 100% of that offering goes overseas. None of it stays to support IMB Richmond offices, or 100% goes overseas to missionary work. I really like to share that 4% of what you give goes to support our TCKs, Third Culture Kids, which is our code name for MKs because we can't call missionary kids that in many countries. 4% of what you give goes to their education and goes to buy homeschool curriculum and pays tuition and allows them to go on field trips when they're in the U.S. But Lottie Moon, it pays our cars, our houses, our salary, our health care, everything that we need to be on the field is supplied by Lottie Moon. We've always said there are no dumb questions, but I take that back. My daughter and I were speaking at a acting camp out at Camp Cordova, back when that was a thing. And one of the sweet young ladies raised her hand because Rachel shared one thing she really missed with Dr. Pepper. And she said, Miss Melody, if I send a Dr. Pepper to your daughter, will it still be cold when it gets there? There are a few dumb questions, but not many.
Not from you. Not from you. There's one.
Prisoner, no.
No, Union has a program now. They're inviting missionaries who are on furlough. They provide housing there on campus, and so it's like really in my wheelhouse because they want us to interact with students and talk commission, them to get to know the missionaries and all. So we're going to be there for at least a year. I am loving it because it's with students. It's in English. We're talking, just it's just a different, because when you're on the mission field, which Union, just because it's Christian doesn't mean there are non-believers on that campus. But the conversations are more evangelistic, if you will, say in Brazil. But at Union, it's more like, hey, I'm looking to do a mission trip. I'm looking to be on mission. I'm talking about my walk with Jesus and that kind of thing. So we are right there on campus, and about 9 a.m. I'll tell Melody I'm going to the office, and I hang out
That
at
means the coffee shop.
the
It's not
coffee
really
shop,
an office.
the cafeteria, and I have so much fun. I go to the events like the graduation yesterday, so getting to know their hearts and know where they are and listening. Because I think sometimes we have a perception of younger generation, and I think if we as older would listen and understand where they're coming from and all. So it's more of an immersion for me to where they were coming to Brazil this time. So that's what that is. It's great. They have 2 houses for furloughing missionaries. They're dorms, but they're nice.
A lot of folks believe as a missionary you just kind of throw a dart at the world map and it hits, and that's where God calls you and you go and you stay and you never leave. They've heard you say Brazil, Canada, Brazil. Give me a quick walkthrough about the changes, whether it's volunteer or we've had folks in this say we were told you cannot minister here anymore. You've got to go and have to pick another part of the world. What's that like from your perspective?
I have some very dear friends that have been in Colombia for years, had a very fruitful ministry in Colombia. Everything was going well, but the government decided not to renew visas and made it very difficult. So those families were displaced and had to find new places to serve, or had to go back to the U.S. for a year and then try again to get back into Colombia. One decided the best way to do that would be to have a baby in Colombia, and that guaranteed they could stay in Colombia. For us, we moved because educational needs of my youngest child, and the IMB graciously gave us the choice to be able to go to Canada and meet his educational needs, and then return to Brazil after he graduated from high school. So we have always said we are called to a person and not a place. Brazil's it's home to us, and we love Brazil, but we are called to a person, and that's God the Father, and wherever he leads, that's where we go. He's just been very gracious to allow us to be in Brazil.
What languages do y'all speak?
Well, very fluently English, semi-fluently Portuguese, and I'm learning Spanish because I travel to a lot of Spanish-speaking countries. So I'm on Duolingo every day trying to get that up to par so I don't have any problem in a taxi or a restaurant.
But English and Portuguese,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of people, they ask, well, how's your Spanish? And I go, okay, Brazil doesn't speak, it's Portuguese. It's a common thought.